When Tolu walked through the gates of Crestwood Academy, she wasn't looking to make a statement. She just wanted to blend in. A new girl from Nigeria, quiet, observant, and unknown. But in a world where skin color still speaks louder than words, some students saw only what they wanted to see, a poor African girl who didn't belong. What they didn't know was who she truly was. Because the girl they mocked, the girl they tried to humiliate, was the daughter of one of Africa's most powerful men. And in time, she would shake the foundations of everything they thought they controlled. Tolu stepped off the plane, and the cool American air brushed against her skin. After the long flight from Nigeria, she felt exhausted, but more than that, she felt nervous. Everything around her seemed so big, so fast, so different. She had grown up in the grand presidential villa in Abuja, surrounded by luxury, bodyguards, and constant attention. Her father, President Bola Adiwale, was one of the most powerful men in Africa. Back home, she was respected, admired, and always protected. But here, in New York City, she was just another face in the crowd. As the black SUV weaved through the busy streets, Tolu pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching in awe. Towering skyscrapers stretched toward the sky. Yellow taxis honked impatiently. People rushed in every direction, their faces serious and focused. Neon billboards flashed bright lights across the streets, advertising everything from fashion to Broadway shows. This city never sleeps, she thought, her heart pounding with excitement. Her father had sent her to Crestwood Academy, an elite private school filled with the children of billionaires, politicians, and celebrities. She had heard stories about the luxury, the pressure, and the unspoken rules of power. But Tolu wasn't scared. She was the daughter of a president. She knew how to handle people like that, or so she thought. Before her first day, she had a few days to explore the city. In Central Park, she walked along the peaceful green paths, listening to the birds and watching children play. Then, she saw a group of street dancers performing on the sidewalk. Music blasted from a speaker as they flipped, spun, and moved with incredible energy. A small crowd cheered and clapped, and for the first time since she arrived, Tolu smiled. At a small cafe, she ordered her first American coffee. The rich, bitter taste surprised her, but she liked it. She sat by the window, watching New Yorkers rush past, each person chasing something, money, success, or maybe just their next appointment. She wandered into Times Square, where the giant digital screens lit up the night like daylight. The air buzzed with excitement, tourists taking selfies, street performers juggling fire, and the non-stop movement of the crowd. She stood there, letting the energy of the city sink in. One evening, her father's assistant took her to try New York-style pizza. It was nothing like the fancy meals she had back home, greasy, cheesy, and messy. But it was hot and delicious, and she found herself enjoying every bite. Each experience made New York feel more real, more exciting, more like a place where anything was possible. Then, the day came. Her first day at Crestwood Academy. As the car pulled up to the massive iron gates of the prestigious school, Tolu took a deep breath. Here, no one knew her as President Adiwale's daughter. Here, she would have to stand on her own. "Are you ready, my dear?" Mrs. Olawale, her father's assistant, asked. She had been sent to look after Tolu while she was in the US. "Yes," Tolu said, though her heart was beating fast. She walked into the school's grand entrance and looked around. The students wore their crisp school uniforms, but it was the designer bags they carried that stood out. Expensive perfumes filled the air. Some of them turned to stare at her, their eyes lingering on her simple braids and plain backpack. Crestwood Academy was a place of wealth and influence. But what they didn't know was that Tolu came from more power than they could ever imagine. Tolu walked into her first class, holding her notebook tightly. The room was full of chatter, but as soon as she stepped inside, the noise faded. She felt their eyes on her, curious, judging, amused. Ignoring them, she took a deep breath and moved toward an empty seat at the back. Before she could sit down, a sharp voice stopped her. "That seat is taken." Tolu looked up and saw a tall, blonde girl with piercing blue eyes standing in front of her. The girl's smug smile made it clear. She wasn't just any student. She was someone who expected to be obeyed. "Oh, sorry," Tolu said, quickly standing up. The girl didn't reply. Instead, she gave Tolu a slow, mocking smile before turning back to her friends, who were watching as if it were entertainment. "The new girl doesn't know the rules yet," one of them whispered loudly. Tolu clenched her jaw but stayed quiet. She found another seat in the corner and sat down, pretending not to hear their laughter. The blonde girl turned to her group. "Anyway, Like I was saying, my dad is taking me to Paris for fall break. We're staying at the Ritz, of course. Ooh, Madison, you're so lucky, another girl gushed. Madison. So that was her name. Toulouse kept her eyes on her notebook, but she could feel the weight of the whispers around her. Madison glanced at her now and then, the others following suit, their eyes lingering. She probably got in on a scholarship, one girl muttered, her voice loud enough for Toulouse to hear. Yeah, definitely. Look at her shoes, another whispered, clearly looking down at Toulouse's simple black flats. Toulouse tried to ignore them, but the sting of their judgment was impossible to shake. She looked down at her shoes, nothing fancy, just practical. In a place like this, everything was measured by status, and she felt painfully out of place. When the teacher finally walked in, the whispers stopped, but Toulouse knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. By lunchtime, Toulouse could already feel the weight of the school's silent judgment, the stares, the whispers. She entered the cafeteria, grabbed a tray, and looked around for an empty seat. Most tables were full of students laughing and chatting like they had known each other forever. Then, she spotted a table near the back and headed toward it. Just as she was about to sit down, a voice called out, "Hey, new girl." Toulouse turned. Madison Carter stood in the middle of a group, arms crossed, a cruel smile on her lips. "Welcome to Crestwood," Madison said, her voice sweet but fake. "I'm Madison Carter. My father owns half the real estate in this city, so you could say I run things around here." Toulouse nodded, uninterested in whatever game Madison was playing. "And you are?" Madison pressed, tilting her head. "Toulouse," she answered calmly. Madison's blue eyes flickered with amusement. "No last name." "Adiwale," Toulouse added. "So, where are you from, new girl?" "Nigeria," Toulouse replied, meeting her gaze. Madison's eyes widened slightly before she burst into fake laughter. "Oh, that makes sense. I've seen those commercials. For just $1 a day, you can save a child in Africa." The table erupted with laughter. Madison exchanged a smirk with her friends. "So mysterious. Let me guess, you're on a scholarship." The girls giggled. Toulouse felt her jaw tighten but stayed quiet. "Oh, come on," Madison continued. "You don't look like you belong here. No offense, but Crestwood isn't really your kind of place." "You don't know anything about me," Toulouse said calmly. Madison raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting a response. "Oh, but I will. See, Crestwood has a way of sorting people. And trust me, we know exactly where you fit." With that, she turned on her heel, leaving Toulouse standing there, her heart pounding. She had only been at Crestwood for an hour, and already, the battle lines had been drawn. The next morning, as soon as Toulouse stepped into the hallway, she felt the stares. Students huddled in small groups, sneaking glances at her before whispering behind their hands. Some even laughed as she walked past. She didn't need to guess what was happening. By the time she reached her locker, a boy was already leaning against it, arms crossed. "Have you checked your phone?" he asked. Toulouse frowned. "Why?" The boy sighed and pulled out his phone, scrolling for a second before turning the screen toward her. Toulouse's stomach twisted at what she saw. A post from one of Madison's friends had gone viral on the school's social media page. "Meet Toulouse, Crestwood's newest charity case. Fresh from Africa, straight out of poverty. Maybe we should start a fundraiser to help her buy some real clothes." Below the post were hundreds of laughing emojis and cruel comments. Toulouse felt her face burn. This was worse than she had thought. The boy lowered his phone. "I'm sorry. Madison and her friends do this to anyone they think doesn't belong here." By lunchtime, the tension in the cafeteria was thick. As Toulouse carried her tray toward an empty table, conversations hushed, followed by quiet laughter. She knew why. Madison's cruel post had spread like wildfire. She kept her head high and focused on her food. If she acted like the whispers didn't bother her, maybe they would lose interest. But Madison wasn't done. Just as Toulouse was about to take a bite, a shadow loomed over her. "Oh look, it's our little African princess," Madison said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Enjoying your meal, charity case." A few students laughed. "Hello." Madison waved a hand in front of Toulouse's face. "You're in my seat." Toulouse ignored her. Madison's smile faded. "Did you hear me?" Toulouse sighed and looked up. Madison stood over her, arms crossed, her expression cold and expectant. Behind her, her clique watched, smirking like they were waiting for a show. "This is an empty table," Toulouse said calmly. Madison let out a dramatic sigh. "Right. And I sit here every day. So, move." The boy from earlier shifted uncomfortably nearby. Come on, Madison. There are plenty of other tables. Madison's sharp gaze snapped to him. Oh, look, the charity case has a friend. The girls behind her giggled. I'm not moving, Toulouse said, her voice steady. The cafeteria went dead silent. No one stood up to Madison, not ever. For a second, Madison just stared at her, as if she couldn't believe someone had dared to say no. Then, slowly, she smiled. Fine, she said sweetly. But if you want to sit here, you should at least hold onto your lunch properly. Before Toulouse could react, Madison's hand shot out, flipping Toulouse's tray. The plate of pasta and juice spilled across the table and onto Toulouse's lap. Gasps and laughter erupted across the cafeteria. Toulouse froze, her entire body tensing as the cold drink soaked into her clothes. Madison stepped back, laughing as if she had just pulled off the greatest joke in history. Oops, she said, fake innocence in her voice. Guess accidents happen. Toulouse gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. Every part of her wanted to react, to say something, to do something, but she knew that was exactly what Madison wanted. Then, a sharp voice cut through the noise. What is going on here? The cafeteria fell silent. Miss Reese, the assistant principal, stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. She glanced at Toulouse's ruined clothes, then at Madison's smirking friends. Who did this? A tense pause. Toulouse looked at Madison, who tilted her head, feigning innocence. Then, she glanced at the boy. He looked like he wanted to speak, but something held him back. Miss Reese's gaze landed on Toulouse. Well, Toulouse hesitated. If she told the truth, she would become even more of a target. If she stayed silent, Madison would win. After a long moment, she took a deep breath and said quietly, "It was an accident." Miss Reese exhaled sharply. "All right. Someone clean this up. Toulouse, go to the office to change your clothes." As Toulouse stood, she heard Madison whisper, "Smart choice, new girl." Toulouse walked through the halls of Crestwood Academy, her uniform still faintly stained from the cafeteria incident. She could hear the whispers, see the amused glances, but she kept moving. Back in Nigeria, her father always told her, true strength isn't about who throws the first punch, but who stands tallest when the fight is over. And Toulouse wasn't about to fall. She stepped into the girls' restroom and locked herself in a stall. Leaning against the door, she inhaled deeply, pushing down the emotions bubbling inside her. She clenched her fists. Back home, no one would have dared humiliate her like this. But hey, she was just an unknown girl they thought was weak, and nobody they could laugh at. Taking a deep breath, she changed into the spare uniform the office had given her. As she buttoned the shirt, she thought about what had just happened. She could have spoken up. She could have exposed Madison in front of Miss Reese. But would it have changed anything? When she finally stepped out of the restroom, the boy from earlier was waiting for her near the lockers. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" Toulouse forced a small smile. "I'm fine." He frowned. "You didn't have to cover for her. Everyone saw what happened." "And what would that have changed?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. He hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. But Madison gets away with everything because no one ever stands up to her." Toulouse sighed. She knew he was right. But she wasn't ready to fight this battle. Not yet. Then, she looked at him. "Thank you for standing up for me. I'm Toulouse." He smiled. "I know. Toulouse Adewale." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Dawson." He pushed his glasses up. Daniel Dawson. The first real friend she would make at Crestwood Academy. That evening, Toulouse barely touched her dinner. The cafeteria incident replayed in her mind. The laughter, the humiliation, Madison's cruel smirk. She sat at the dining table in her family's penthouse apartment, pushing her food around her plate. The aroma of jollof rice, grilled chicken, and fried plantains, her favorite meal, did little to lift her spirits. Mrs. Olawale, her father's assistant, watched her closely. "Toulouse, you've barely eaten." "I'm not hungry," Toulouse murmured. Then, her phone buzzed. A video call from home. She hesitated before answering. The moment the screen lit up, her father, President Bola Adewale, appeared, seated in his grand office. His strong, familiar face softened when he saw her. "My daughter," he said warmly. "How is America treating you?" Toulouse swallowed, forcing a smile. "It's fine, Papa." He studied her carefully. "That does not sound convincing." She hesitated. For a brief second, she wanted to tell him everything. The way Madison treated her, how the students assumed she was poor, how alone she felt. But she knew what he would do. One call, and the school would know who she really was. But that wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want respect because of her father. She wanted to earn it. It's just different, she finally said. But I'm handling it. Her father nodded slowly. Good. I did not raise a weak daughter. She straightened. You didn't. Remember who you are, Tolu, he said firmly. You are not defined by what people think of you. Strength is not in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. His words settled deep in her chest. I will remember, Papa, she said. As the call ended, Tolu felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a girl from Nigeria. She was Tolu Adewale, daughter of a president. And no one, especially not Madison, was going to break her. The next morning, Tolu walked into school with renewed determination. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Strength is not in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. She had promised herself she wouldn't let Madison get to her. But by lunchtime, that promise was put to the test. Because then came the prank. When she opened her locker before her next class, a pile of old, tattered clothes tumbled out. Laughter erupted down the hallway. Pinned to her locker was a note. For the poor scholarship girl. Welcome to America. Tolu froze. A sharp, burning humiliation spread through her chest. Her fingers clenched around the locker door. Across the hall, Madison leaned against the lockers, arms crossed, watching with a satisfied smirk. Oops, she said, pretending to be surprised. Looks like someone made a donation just for you. Tolu's hands curled into fists. For the first time, she felt the deep, undeniable urge to fight back, not just with words, but with action. But she took a deep breath. She wouldn't give them the reaction they wanted. Without a word, she bent down, picked up the clothes, and shoved them into the trash. Then, she turned and walked away, her head held high. Behind her, the laughter faded. They had expected her to cry, to yell, to break. But she hadn't. And as she walked to class, she knew one thing for certain. This had to end. And she would be